Welcome to the Putback with Ian Begley here on SNY.TV. We're going to be breaking things down with the Knicks and the NBA for the next half hour or so. And we've got two great guests with us this week. We've got Pat O'Keefe, the host, and does some hosting and play-by-play for MSG Network. So I'm sure you've heard his work. And we have James Edwards III, Knicks beat writer for The Athletic. He's been doing a fantastic job covering this team so far in his first season on the beat. Also, we would love to hear from you. So please leave your questions in the comments section, and we'll be sure to get to as many of those as we can later in the show. But we're going to start off here, as we always do, with the baseline. Knicks beating the Orlando Magic soundly at Madison Square Garden on Tuesday night. A really resounding win and something that I didn't expect. I thought it was going to be a tighter game given how the Magic were playing, but they win their group in the NBA Cup and they advance to the quarterfinals. They will host the Atlanta Hawks next Wednesday at the Garden. And right now, James, this offense is reminding me of 1998 Minnesota Vikings or the Kurt Warner Rams. I mean, it's been really impressive so far, the way they've been able to score the ball. What has stood out to you over these last few weeks watching this team on offense?
Yeah, I think there are a few things. One, the way that they move the ball. If you look, it feels like every game they're setting a new season high in assists. And then you look at the type of shots they are getting. I think they're getting good quality shots. Some nights they make them at a high clip, some nights they don't. But I do like what the offense is generating for the most part. It's the Jalen Brunson cat pick and roll has continued to grow. I think Jalen has really evolved as a passer over the last year and a half or so. So there's a lot of good things going on, and that Orlando one was a big win just simply because I think outside of Denver, you look at the schedule, and to this point, they didn't really have a big win. And now they have two in the last week, so that's a big one to get.
Pat, what about from your seat, man? What have you seen? What surprised you from this offense recently?
Well, it's funny, you look at last night's game, and it was kind of a measuring stick game considering how well Orlando had been playing and the style that they play. Really good defense, physical team. And I know they're missing their best player in Paolo Banchero, but he isn't the cog to those specific aspects. And then Orlando comes out, they knock down a couple threes. It's 9-2, it's 14-6. And you're wondering, all right, is this going to be one of the nights where the Knicks offense gets slowed down? And the middle of that first quarter, they just took off. And James hit on a lot of the points. The ball movement has been unbelievable, led by Jalen Brunson. I think there's been an increased emphasis on being a distributor this season because he has so many more offensive options, namely Karl-Anthony Towns, and then OG Anunoby can get going. Mikal Bridges has found his shot the last couple of games. There is, a grittiness that persists with this team in the form of Hart and a little bit of Anunoby and McBride coming off the bench. So, they can get you in a number of different ways. The ball movement is very aesthetically pleasing. And then they haven't lost, what made them successful for large portions of last year, which is that grittiness. So when the ball doesn't go in the basket, there's a chase after the ball, a concerted effort to extend the possession that has also benefited the offensive numbers.
I give Jalen Brunson some credit here because I think early on in the season, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I did see him dribbling the ball throughout a possession and maybe kind of forcing up a contested shot here or there in some of those early games. And that's, I think, has been out of his diet more recently. And he's really distributed the ball well. He's found cutters. He's found guys who have been open, and he's found ways to attack a defense when he's single covered. And if you look at his numbers, best assist percentage so far of his career, really strong assist to turnover ratio. He's top 10 in both marks among players who play at least 30 minutes. And you look at this Knicks offense, the assist to turnover ratio is the best in the NBA, as are the points per 100 possessions. So I think Brunson is the guy who's made this go by maybe sacrificing a few shots and looking for his teammates a little bit more often. James, have you seen the same thing or something different?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think early on, I don't want to say Jalen looked lost, but he looked like he was figuring out what to do with these new pieces. And I think as the season started to ramp up and we got toward the end of the preseason, we talked a lot about how does Cat fit into this, how all these things are going to benefit Jalen Brunson when time happens. But it's also like Jalen has to adapt to this new group too, and I don't think we really factored that in. This is a much different roster than what he played with last year. Not saying good or bad. I'm saying it's just different. Like it was a Brunson-centric offense last year, and to a point it still is, right? But there's so many weapons now that he has to find a way to get everybody involved and to make the right read at the right time and also just make life easier on himself. And I think as the season's gone on, he's found a way to make life easier on himself, and I think that's the biggest thing.
Pat, how about you on Brunson over the course of this season, the first 21 games?
His overall game is so much more efficient, and I think it took him a few games to, adjust to his new life with all of these weapons. I mean, think about the last time we saw Brunson on the floor last year in that Indiana series where he had to take 25 and upward shots a game because he was the fulcrum of the Knicks offense. It took him 5 or 6 games to adjust to that this year. He's adjusted very well. His efficiency numbers are all better across the board. He's taking 3 fewer field goal attempts per game, but his field goal percentage is up. His 3-point percentage is up. His free throw percentage is up. His minutes per game are down. His assists are up. His assist to turnover ratio is the best of his career. So across the board, just in terms of efficiency, because he has adapted pretty quickly. I mean, the first 5 or 6 games when that's all that we had to go by, that period of time that James just alluded to where, he got off to a little bit of a slow start. We saw it, but he broke out of that. He snapped out of that pretty quickly. And, he's as good as ever. He's as efficient as ever, but it's different than the type of player I think that we saw, especially last year.
It does seem like a different version of Brunson, and even with that slow start, he does lead the NBA right now in overall plus minus. I think he's a plus 608 on the year, and I think, just looking at this thing objectively, if you're Brunson and you are the face of the Knicks, you're the captain of the Knicks, you're coming off a season where, really 2 seasons where you've led this team to the second round of the playoffs, place where they hadn't been in so long, and then you add some pieces, right? I could see the human element of a player maybe saying, I still want to get mine. I still want to take my shots and kind of let these guys fit around me. And to Brunson's credit, I mean, he's just a smart player, right? Tom Thibodeau talks about it all the time, how Brunson can adapt to different situations. And even Jamal Mosley, the Magic coach who coached Brunson in Dallas as a top assistant, just talked about how he can adjust to a defense, and he really keeps defenses guessing because you put 2 on him, he can take advantage of that. You single cover him, he takes advantage of that. So I always felt like he was going to be able to adjust and ultimately fit in a way that made sense for this team. I'm just impressed with the way that he's done it so quickly. I just think other players, maybe their ego gets in the way. It takes a little bit longer, but here we are. Game 21, a quarter of the way through the season, and this offense is playing pretty seamlessly right now. One reason for that, obviously, is Karl-Anthony Towns, James, and it seems to me like he should get credit for the way that he's fit in here, too, in the same way I just talked about Brunson. We saw the move last night on Mo Wagner. Mo Wagner kind of stood him up in the post. He looked at the ref, and then he hits that fall-away jump shot on the baseline. Seemed like he was just having fun out there. What do you think, James, about how Towns has fit in so far?
Yeah, I think it's a good topic to bring up because I think one thing he doesn't get credit for is his ability to adapt to different situations. And it goes all the way back to Minnesota, right? Like we saw the last kind of 2 years, Anthony Edwards pushing to the forefront of that organization and Cat seriously taking a step back and allowing Anthony to blossom and allowing that development to carry that Timberwolves team to different heights. Now you get to a situation in New York where they have a lot of good pieces, but they have a lot of injuries in the front court. What do they need? They need rebounding. And after 2 years of not averaging over 10 rebounds a game, and obviously part of that is playing with Rudy Gobert, Cat gets back to a level of rebounding where I think he's close to 13 a game, if not over. Something he hasn't done in a few seasons since he last, I think, was with Tom Thibodeau. So you see him adapting there and hitting the glass and being one of the best contested rebounders in the league. And his shot attempts are down, but that's obviously comes with playing with the type of players he plays with. But he's still as efficient as he's been. And You watch him, and it's like this is legitimately one of the best shooting big men to ever play the game. His passing has really shown great flashes at points in the season. Just very selfless player, and willing to do the dirty work. I remember I used to cover when Blake Griffin got traded to the Pistons. You always kind of had this vision of Blake as like this Hollywood guy and this and that, right? But he's very much a very blue-collared player. And you forget he's from Oklahoma, and then you see him. It's like, oh, he fits in the Pistons like mold of players that they tend to gravitate toward. I think Cat's in the same boat, and I think it's really shown just with how aggressive he's been willing to get on the glass and how much he takes pride in that too. Like I think there is the New York radiates out of him, even though he's more of a finesse player.
It's funny. I think narratives kind of, once they get attached to you, they hang around, and maybe sometimes they hang around you unfairly or too long because, there was the criticism with Jimmy Butler with Minnesota. He felt that, Karl-Anthony Towns wasn't, I guess, his kind of player from an intensity standpoint. And I think that kind of made its way around the league. But Pat, to me, I haven't seen an instance or many instances at all where you look at Karl and you say, wow, he should have given you more on that play, or, he could have been more physical on that play. If it's happened, I haven't seen it much yet at all. What have you seen?
I agree with that. It's almost as if, and how could he not be aware of it? But it seems to me, watching him night in and night out, that he's aware that has been the narrative. And look, this isn't the team, and this isn't the head coach to come in and play for and play with if that's the narrative surrounding you. So what I've seen from Karl-Anthony Towns is, yes, he's still shooting 45% from downtown, but he's not hanging out on the perimeter behind the three-point arc, just waiting for an open look to chuck it up. Every few possessions, if he has not already gone inside, he makes an effort to go inside and to be physical. The rebounding numbers speak for itself as really, the lone 7-footer on this team right now until Mitchell Robinson comes back. He knows that the boards are his. I mean, the Knicks have a 6'4" guy who's averaging over 8 rebounds per game as their second leading rebounder. So he knows the importance of that role on this team. But what I've seen is a conscious effort on the part of Karl-Anthony Towns to be as physical as possible. Now, does it always work out? No. Sometimes he goes in there, he doesn't look overly comfortable. Sometimes he forces the issue trying to take it to the basket inside the paint. But what I like overall is the mindset and the commitment to be physical in that position on this team.
Yeah, one thing that I heard that I thought was interesting earlier in the year was Tom Thibodeau having no problem coaching Karl-Anthony Towns hard, talking to him and directing him in ways that maybe you didn't hear Thibodeau doing the same with Julius Randle. And I think over the course of Randle's tenure here in New York, I think that caused some issues in the locker room where some players felt like Julius Randle was held to one standard and others were held to a different standard. Sometimes that's just the nature of the NBA, but when a team is struggling, go back to Thibodeau's second season as the Knicks were struggling, those things come to the surface. I just thought it was interesting that you haven't heard that with Thibodeau and Karl Towns, at least earlier in the year, where he was coaching him the way he would coach everybody else. To me, that's a sign of a healthy locker room. And somebody else who makes this Knick locker room pretty healthy to me is Josh Hart. He always likes to keep things light, as we all know, but you look at his numbers on the floor and they have been really, really strong. I think he deserves some credit for how he has fit in to this starting five, his role in the starting five. He's found a way to be very, very effective. And one number that we were looking at was his field goal percentage around the rim. And it turns out he's one of the best big men in the NBA, because you have Wemby, Hart, Jared Allen, Daniel Gafford, Anthony Davis at the top of the list in field goal percentage around the rim. Josh Hart being right there would surprise, I think, anybody who is guessing at that list. Pat, your thoughts on Hart, his role, and what he's done so far in it?
Well, it's funny. I think back to the preseason when the conversation around Hart was he's not really sure what his role is on this team. And it turns out that he just puts his head down. He plays the only way he knows how, hard and smart and intense. And it turns out that on this team, his role is more important than it ever has been, both on the court and in the locker room as a leader on the team, You mentioned how good his presence is for the locker room just to keep things light. And I know you're in there all the time. And it certainly seems like it's a light atmosphere inside that locker room. And he's got a big hand in that. But just the way that, and it's the consistency. It's night in and night out. There are no nights off for this guy. It's 35 plus minutes a night. It's 10 to 15 points a night. It's 8 to 12 rebounds a night. It's 2 to 3 steals a night. You never get a night off from this guy. And he, we know Brunson's the leader of the team, but, as the second lieutenant, for lack of a better phrase, I mean, Josh Hart is so important to what this team does.
James, I've been in some locker rooms that are, where guys did not get along well, where losing kind of eroded the team chemistry, and you can sense it when a team is not playing well, and then they don't, they start pointing fingers and things kind of go sideways. I've seen that. I don't know if you've bore witness to that during your years in Detroit, but just the way that Josh Hart has been in this locker room. You've been on the road with the team. You've spent a lot of time in there. Your thoughts on his impact in the room based on what you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, he seems to have a great relationship with everybody, just aside from the humor he brings and just his personality. The fact that he's not willing to bite his tongue. And I think guys do respect that. When things aren't going right, he tends to be the one in the locker room who gives the most detailed answer as to why. He's a guy that's not afraid to call out any type of instance that the team is going through, whether good or bad, and not giving too much praise, but also like not worrying too much when things are going bad. And I think that goes a long way, and I think guys gravitate toward that. But he's certainly somebody who Josh is thriving by being Josh. And these are all things he's done before. He's able to do them at a higher level now because he's playing with really good players that are opening up spaces for him to cut and opening up opportunities for him in transition as a great kick-ahead passer. And he's shooting the three ball well, too. Like, I don't think that should go unnoticed, especially after at least the last few years struggling from that department, or at least last year, right? So he's a guy who's confident in who he is as a player, and I think that goes a long way. And he's a guy who has great respect in the locker room just simply because his personality, but also I think the realness in which he keeps it. And you can never have too many of those guys. You look at some of the last title teams, the KCPs of the world. Draymond Green's the most obvious, right? These guys are the guys that teams are coveting, these X factors, if you want to call them, these Swiss Army knives. And when you can get a premier one, I think it takes your team a long way. The low maintenance offensive player that does a little bit of everything but still finds ways to impact the game. That's as valuable to me as getting a second superstar.
I agree with everything you said, James. And I think I heard the phrase, how real he keeps it. And I think that's the first Nas lyric ever on the Putback. I'm very happy to hear that. And I appreciate you bringing that to the table. We needed it. Now we're gonna push forward to what we learned, presented by Binghamton University. Binghamton University was named the top school in the SUNY system according to recent rankings from the Wall Street Journal and Forbes. Visit binghamton.edu for more information. And I'm gonna go Deuce McBride here because we've all seen the numbers, right? He's been back for about 10 days since that knee injury, and he is shooting the ball just as well as he did before he got hurt. He's up over 50% on a little more than 20 attempts from beyond the arc since coming back. And we were talking to him last night, and he was saying that he still feels the knee a little bit, and he actually had some tendonitis in that knee, in that left knee. That was a result of him coming off of the toe surgery and him kind of favoring his left side a little bit, I guess, during that rehab. So he developed a little tendonitis, and he's working through that. And to me, the interesting thing there is I'll go back to a conversation I had with him a couple weeks back before he got hurt. And he was saying that, his conditioning is very good, not all the way there yet. And he feels like he had another level to get to conditioning wise and getting in rhythm. And he felt like he could bring even more offensively and obviously defensively, but he felt like there was another level that he could get to. And that's interesting to me because he's already playing at such a high level for this team. So if he can stay on the floor and can continue to get his rhythm, get some conditioning back, keep an eye on even more from Miles McBride. Another what we learned here, Rick Brunson, the NBA's query into the promotion of Rick Brunson by the Knicks and whether that was illegal from a cap perspective based on Jalen Brunson's team-friendly extension. That inquiry has closed. The NBA asked questions on a few occasions of the Knicks about this matter, and obviously nothing has come of it. So I guess we could put that in the rearview mirror, and we're going to move on now to a segment that I'm excited about because it's Inside the Knicks. We're going to talk to James Edwards about his new series on The Athletic, where he takes you inside the locker room and he tells some great stories based on conversations he's had and just getting to know James a little bit, first few weeks on the beat. I agree with a lot of his Knick opinions. I don't agree with every opinion, but I agree with a lot of them. But we certainly agree on Peggy Bundy. And
yes, we do.
She is criminally underrated in pop culture. And James, I'm so glad you brought that to my attention, man, because you're 1,000% right. You're getting me back into Married with Children now.
Yes.
That just brought me way back. And we do need to really rethink how we talk about Peggy Bundy. And she deserves some more respect in my eyes. So, James, thank you for that, Peggy. We love you. Married with Children, classic show. All right, I'm done. We're going to get to James Edwards now, his new series, Inside the Knicks. You can check it out on The Athletic. And James, can you tell us a little bit about the series? Can you share anything from it?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of conversations with guys in the locker room, and the setup, Ian, like sometimes you don't get as much time with somebody as you wish, so maybe you hold on to something a little too long or you want to revisit something. So for me, it's almost like I empty the notebook, like stuff that I didn't think would be able to stand alone on like 1,000-word feature that I could compile to 3 small things to make one big story. And it's just stuff that, to me, what's one thing about our job that I take pride in is every time a reader or a fan reads me, I want them to take away something they didn't know. Like that's why I'm presented the access I have. That's why I go on the road, like to get you stuff. Like you guys, everybody can watch the game and they can form their own opinions. And obviously I like to tackle game coverage as well. But it's important to be able to get stuff that our access only allows. So that's kind of my thing there. I just wanted to peel back the curtain, give people a look at these guys and talk about some of the more quirky stuff like the Deuce McBride chants. I have no idea how that started. Deuce didn't either. But it's something that, as you know, Ann, and Pat, anytime Deuce shoots a jump shot, that's all we hear is Deuce. So just stuff that a little lighthearted and get to know the guys too, because I am still relatively new, and find ways to just continue to build those relationships.
But it's a great idea, well executed. Again, check it out on The Athletic. Pat, any Inside the Knicks stories from you that come to mind?
Well, you kind of stole my thunder with the Deuce McBride a little bit. I'm not in the locker room as much as you guys are, spending most of my time up in the radio booth during and after the games. But just the Deuce McBride development has just been one of the most pleasant stories, I think, surrounding this team. I mean, we remember when he was drafted, 36th overall pick, 2021, early second round pick. And by the way, name me another NBA team in the last decade that's done better with second round draft picks than the Knicks have, from McBride to Jericho Sims to Mitchell Robinson. But I digress. And then we remember the monster trade just before New Year's Eve last year when the team was in Indiana, sending Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett to Toronto in exchange for OG Anunoby. The secondary story coming out of that day was Deuce McBride signing a modest $12 million contract extension. I use the word modest, modestly there, but giving him some security, much needed security and much deserved at that point in his career. That day he entered the rotation. He was in and out of the rotation for his first 2.5 years of his career based on who was available and who wasn't. That day he entered the rotation. He has not left the rotation. He has turned into not an adequate shooter, not a dependable shooter. He has turned into a phenomenal shooter. I mean, since that day, he's played 66 regular season games, and he has shot nearly 41% from downtown on 5 attempts per game. And that is a long way from who he was described as when he came out of West Virginia in the early second round in 2021. kind of a tweener, maybe a guy who could play a little point guard, a dogged defender, and a guy who needed to work on his offensive game. Well, he's worked on his offensive game, and he has just turned himself into a phenomenal shooter.
Yeah, I mean, it's been one of the, I think, underplayed, and I say that as a media member, so someone who's supposed to bring these things to the forefront, probably underplayed, under-talked about stories of this Knick regime and Miles himself, just the way that he has really just gotten better year after year and where he is right now. Really remarkable. I am going to give you one quick story inside the Knicks, and it's just a brief one, but I thought it was hilarious that Josh Hart and Jalen Brunson on their podcast, they had a fan video on there, and they were reacting to the video, and the video was from my buddy Uncle Raw, and he's just one of those passionate Knick fans. He was upset after a Knick loss because he saw a podcast episode airing the day after a Knick loss, and his thing was like, why are we doing podcasts? Just get some wins. I don't want to see the podcast. I don't know who Ronnie Feig is. Just get some wins. He used more colorful language than that. And the guys, to their credit, they obviously didn't get offended by it. They actually put it on the show, and they broke it down, and I thought that was hilarious. But I was asking Josh Hart casually last night about it, and he said, hey, listen, hopefully we've given this guy, meaning Uncle Raw, something to be happy about with all these wins. And I would assume Uncle Raw is much happier than he was when he uploaded that video. So with that, we are going to hit quickly injury updates. Mitchell Robinson, not much new there. Steady progress is kind of what you're getting from Tom Thibodeau there. I don't think much on the court yet at all. Seems to me that late December, January timetable is still in place. Haven't heard anything about a setback. And also, just to reiterate, Mitchell Robinson's name had come up a lot in trade discussions in the offseason. And so I assumed that, coming into this year, they were going to just move on from him. But I haven't found that to be the case in recent conversations. We mentioned it the other week. I think that there's much more support to needing Mitchell Robinson on this roster and having him come back and be the rim protector that you need, particularly in the postseason. And there's much more support that way as there is to moving him. So just something to note as he continues to rehab. First Achua, Tom Thibodeau said he should be back from his hamstring injury sometime very soon, whether it's later this week, early next week. He continues to progress. That's what we have on the injury front. Before we let Mr. James Edwards go, James, I need a quick prediction from you on the NBA Cup. How do you see it playing out?
Man, I mean, I kind of want to manifest a trip to Vegas in December. So I'm going to go New York, and credit to Milwaukee, who obviously has turned it around and has looked really good. I think we get New York and Milwaukee in the semifinals and the East Finals. I'm going to go Oklahoma City versus Houston in the West, with Oklahoma City squeaking it out. Let's go Knicks, Thunder in the championship. Don't ask me to pick who wins.
Most importantly, we get James Edwards in Vegas in mid-December. Thank you so much for joining us, James. We appreciate it, man. Keep up the great work.
Appreciate you.
We are going to wrap up here with the Talkback. And the Talkback is where we take some questions from you guys and we answer them. We dig into whatever you guys are asking us about. So we don't have my friend Matt Spenley today. He usually is the one who's bringing the questions to the table. So I'm going to be getting those questions. So we're going to start now with BX Marathoner 6 on YouTube. And BX Marathoner says they really need to have more stakes with this tournament. Guaranteed home court advantage, playoff spot, extra cap room to get a buyout player, ability to amnesty a bad contract. And I love these ideas. I don't know if they would come to fruition, but the more stakes, the better. The extra cap space, the amnesty, man, that's fantastic stuff from the Marathoner. Pat, where are you on the NBA Cup so far, and what about these additions that BX Marathoner is talking about?
I like some of those suggestions as well, but I'm with you. I don't know if they come to fruition. What I would say about the NBA Cup is this, because I've had a lot of conversation about this with listeners on the shows that I host on ESPN New York. And, there's a certain sector of fan that just will not accept that this is a positive thing. I think you have to keep into context what the NBA Cup was designed to do. What it was designed to do was attach more interest to regular season NBA games in late November and early December than were previously there. And I think in that regard, it's been a success. I mean, if you were at the game last night, there was more juice surrounding that matchup than there otherwise would have been for a New York Knicks Orlando Magic regular season game on December 3rd. You know, part of it was Orlando's playing really well, and it was a team ahead of the Knicks in the standings in the Eastern Conference, so I acknowledge that. But this is the second year in a row that I've experienced it, because last year when the Knicks also punched their ticket to the NBA Cup quarterfinals, it was a weeknight game against the Charlotte Hornets, and there was genuine excitement in the building for that as well, because last year the Knicks needed a certain amount of positive point differential to earn the wild card spot, which they did. And again, if it adds 10%, 15% more excitement and interest than that game without the NBA Cup would normally generate, then I think it's a success. And that's what it's done.
Yeah, it's been, I think, an attention grabber. If you want to hear somebody who's against the NBA Cup, listen to Mike Francesa's podcast.
Exactly.
Every chance he gets. And I think it's grown on me a bit. If you throw in any of those things that our questioner had talked about, it's going to grow on me much more because the stakes will be even higher. We're going to get to David Katz, who chimes in on YouTube, and he asks, what do you think's changed about Mikal Bridges these past two games? He looks like a different player. The team seems to thrive when he has the highest plus. I think maybe that's plus minus. It's a great point from David, though. I think the Knicks, you go back to that New Orleans game, Mikal Bridges was coming off a game in which he was benched in the final, I think, 8 minutes. The Knicks win against the Hornets. Then they come home off that long road trip. They play New Orleans, a depleted team. And I think the Knicks really made it a point to get the ball to Bridges and get him good looks. And he shot the ball incredibly well that night. 31 points, 7 threes. And I think what you saw against Orlando was a continuation of that, just his comfort level increasing. And you saw him get into the passing lane a couple times, get a couple steals. And to me, look, I'll never tell anybody what to think or how to think about anything with regards to the Knicks. But with Bridges, to me, you just give him time, and he keeps saying it. It's just going to take time. I think he's going to be the player and the piece that the Knicks envisioned when they traded for him at the end of the day, end of this year, postseason. I think he will be that guy who is defending well, comfortable with his defensive obligations and knocking shots down and being, a secondary creator. I think it's just going to take him time to get where he was maybe previously and where Knicks fans want him to be. But I don't think there's anything that's going to prevent him from actually getting there, aside from an injury. And Pat, I'm curious, you obviously watched this team religiously, and you've seen Bridges in Brooklyn, you've seen him in Phoenix. You know what's going on here. What are your thoughts on his early stint with the Knicks?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. And I'll add a couple of things. The benching in Charlotte, yes, he didn't play the final 8.5 minutes. He still played 36 minutes in that game, which shows the importance that Tom Thibodeau knows that he holds in this rotation. It's just that Deuce had a game going off the bench. He didn't want to take him out. So one of the starters had to sit on the bench. It happened to be Bridges that night because he wasn't playing his best game. Number two, and fans get hung up on this a lot. RJ Barrett dealt with this a lot. RJ Barrett was a good player in New York. He's a good player in Toronto. It was difficult for some fans to assess RJ Barrett without also mentioning where he was picked in the draft, number 3 overall. The same thing I'm noticing with Bridges. Fans are judging him not based on what they need him to be in the Knicks rotation. He's being judged largely by what the Knicks had to give up in that trade. What they gave up in that trade is what the market demanded they give up in that trade with the Nets in the offseason. Bridges was a guy who fit the Knicks rotation at the time. The dynamic has changed a little bit, obviously, because when they made that trade, they didn't know that Karl-Anthony Towns was going to be part of the equation. But it's been 21 games. What I have seen from him the last 2 games has not surprised me. Like I said, I agree with you. I think over time he's going to be just fine. And it was just more of a validation, I think, of how good this locker room is the reaction in the aftermath of the Charlotte game. Josh Hart immediately coming to his defense, and then his other Villanova teammate the following game in New Orleans, Jalen Brunson, making a conscious effort to get him the ball, get him going, and it worked.
Yeah, Pat, you mentioned the minutes with Bridges. He and Anunoby, I think, are around the tops in the NBA for average per game and maybe total minutes. And I think, Precious Achiuwa, he comes back and he eases those minute demands on both of those guys. It's going to be interesting to see how the coaching staff works Achiuwa in and who gets fewer minutes. But I do think he could give OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges a few minutes off per night. We're going to wrap up here with Tariq S., who joins us on YouTube. He wants to know, he says, regular season Cat's a beast. I'm going to judge Cat during the playoffs, which has been his Achilles heel regarding toughness and defense, and it's all fair framing from Tariq S. for me. But Pat, for you, do you take anything away from Towns' early season play and what it might look like in the postseason, or is it totally separate for you?
No, and that's fair, for him to be judged by what he does in the postseason, because his postseason record in Minnesota was not great. He also wasn't on teams, I think, as good as this one. I know they ended up having a really good season last year, but overall, those teams weren't as good and as deep and as well-rounded as this team. What I put a lot of stock in is what I'm seeing right now. And what I'm seeing right now, as good as Towns has been through the first 9 years of his career, I'm seeing a different type of player right now. I'm seeing a guy who is still as good an outside shooter as any big man in the NBA. And on top of that, I'm seeing a guy who has certainly added a physical component to his game. And I don't anticipate either of those things going away when the calendar turns to April, May, and these games are in the postseason.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if the health is there, then I would assume he plays the same way he's playing now. That'll do it for us. Knicks have Kemba Walker, Taj Gibson, and the Charlotte Hornets on Thursday before they wrap up against Detroit Saturday, wrap the week up. And we will be back with you on the Putback on December 12th. After that quarterfinal matchup, Knicks-Hawks at the Garden. We'll be back with you to break all things Knicks down. And we want to thank Pat O'Keefe, host and play-by-play MSG Networks, and James Edwards III, beat writer for the Knicks with The Athletic. We appreciate you guys joining us, and we'll see everybody soon.